Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast. Thank you again for tuning in to another excellent episode. Today, we have a very special guest. His name is Ron Gusek, and he's currently serving as the president of Liberty Oilfield Services out of Denver, where his main focus has always been on new technology and innovation, supply chain, company culture, and external relations. Ron was born in Alberta, Canada, yay, another Canadian. He holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from University of Alberta. And over his last 20 years of oilfield experiences, he has worked for Sandgel Corporations, Zodiac Exploration, Pinnacle Technologies, and BJ Services, and all with a main primary focus on hydraulic fracturing in unconventional reservoirs. So we're going to dig deep into his story, and we're going to find out how all those transitions were made and how he is today president of Liberty Oilfield Services. So Ron, thank you so much for being here today.
I appreciate the opportunity. I'm excited to be part of your podcast. It's been fun to follow over the last year, and I'm glad to be here to tell a story today.
Thank you.
Well, we've been really excited ever since the first pre-interview with you. We couldn't wait for this moment. So let's just jump right in so the listeners can hear all about you. So we know you're from Canada. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your life growing up in Canada and, what was that like?
Sure. So yeah, proud Canadian. And I get a lot of grief for that down here. I wave my Canadian flag a lot. So I grew up just outside of Edmonton, Alberta. So I was born there. For those who've never been, that's maybe 6 hours north of the U.S. border. Kind of right in the center of Alberta, about 4 hours east of the Rocky Mountains. And so prairie country, it's farmland mostly around there. I grew up in a little town called Ardrossan, which is almost a suburb of Edmonton. My parents live on an acreage there in the house my dad built just after I was born. So they've been there about 50 years in the same place. And that was the home I grew up in. It was a fun spot. We were a modest middle-class family, and my dad was a tradesman. He was a carpenter early on in his life, ultimately became a firefighter and an EMT later on. But we had a shop on the yard, and so I spent many fun evenings and weekends out in the shop with my dad, tinkering away. My mom grew up on a farm. Her parents were homesteaders in a little further east in Alberta. Have been on that piece of property now 110 or 115 years or something. But that was another favorite place of mine to go. I loved spending time out on the farm, and my grandfather also a real tinkerer, and so I spent a lot of time around machines, around equipment, taking things apart, fixing this and that. So really came to enjoy that part of my life. I've been thinking a lot since we talked about just what it means to grow up as a child and how those things influence you, and what it is that your parents ultimately bring to the table to help form you as a growing child, youth, and eventually adult. And certainly I think as I look back, I take away a lot of things from that. Number one, just my love for all things mechanical. I don't do much mechanical engineering anymore, but I still love to tinker when I'm given the opportunity. Hard work ethic, definitely another thing that just came from my time as a child. I had grandparents who were farmers. My dad's family, first generation in Canada, they left what would have been East Germany to come to Canada in hopes of giving their family a better life. And I think came to a new place, didn't know a lot of people, but buckled down and made a great life for them and their family. And so that, those values instilled in my parents and ultimately instilled in me as I grew up. I chose mechanical engineering as my career after I got out of high school, and probably no surprise, just given my love for all things mechanical. I went to school at the University of Alberta, which was close to home. I lived at home. My parents gave me the opportunity to stay there and fed me and put a roof over my head while I went to school, which was quite nice. Maybe took away a little of the shock and awe from going from high school to university, but loved all things about engineering, and so had a ton of fun there, and unfortunately, given the circumstances today, haven't had much opportunity to get back to Canada to visit folks. The border is closed for a little while yet, but look forward to the day I can go back and see everybody there.
Awesome. And growing up in Alberta, I would have thought maybe, did you grow up around oil and gas or family members, or did your parents ever think of going in oil and gas? Because it is primary, like the number one resource out of Alberta. So did you go into mechanical engineering thinking like, I want to go work on a rig eventually, or I want to go work for an operator, or was that like out of sight?
It certainly wasn't out of sight. Oil and gas was everywhere. I think, when I was a teenager in Alberta, running through the 1980s, oil and gas was 35% of Alberta's GDP, I think. So it was a huge piece of the world I grew up in, and certainly the province that I grew up in. And you could see it around, the first big well in Leduc, Alberta, just south of where I grew up. You saw it every time you drove up and down the highway headed down to Calgary. And so it was there, but the interesting thing about my timing being a teenager and maybe just before I headed into high school, of course, was a huge change in the price of oil in the early and mid 80s. So Alberta suffered tremendously as a result of that massive 1980s downturn. Unemployment went up meaningfully. House prices in Calgary dropped 30 or 40%. GDP fell. Alberta was in a recession for a number of years. It was a tough time to be in the province. I remember interest rates going to north of 20%. If you were paying a mortgage on a house, it was, it was a very challenging time. And so, seeing that all around, and it probably took Alberta's oil industry, maybe a decade or more to repair itself. I think it was into the 90s, I would say, before we really had our feet underneath us again. But having watched that as a teenager, and maybe coming from a family where I wouldn't say we were huge risk takers, I grew up in a world where you just learn to be very conservative about things. I looked at that and decided I couldn't work in oil and gas. And so, my summer jobs through university were not related to oil and gas at all. In fact, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And so that was ultimately what I did when I got out of school. I thought everybody would need heating or air conditioning all the time, and that would be a relatively stable career for me to find myself in. And so I did that. I joined a small manufacturing firm, and I worked there for a number of years. But partway through my time there, it was a small organization. I had a lot of fun, but ultimately the owner decided he was going to sell the business. He was getting ready to retire, and that put a little bit of uncertainty on the table. Didn't know where that was going to go. And so I just started looking around for some opportunities. I didn't have a friend from engineering who had not found their way into the energy industry, and primarily oil and gas, of course. That was what most people did out of engineering in Alberta. And so my roommate at the time was working for what was NowSco Well Services before, ultimately BJ Services. That was how they came back to Canada. And he arranged for a job with the engineering manager there. I interviewed on a Monday. By Friday, I had a job offer. It paid 50% more than I was earning in air conditioning. And so I was sold. I threw in the towel on HVAC and threw my lot in with everybody else in oil and gas.
And never looked back.
Never looked back. Ended up in the frack industry purely by accident, but oh my gosh, what a ride since then.
Well, what's really interesting is that it was around, I think, 1998 when you went over to BJ. And during that time, I remember you telling us that you were fracking like one stage a day, and like you were home by daylight hours, and just very different. Can you explain kind of what that was like when you were at BJ Services during that time, and what fracking looked like then?
Sure. Very different world, of course, than it's turned out to be today. My friend that got me introduced there, he worked in coil tubing, and I remember those guys were out on wells for extended periods of time through day and night. I had never heard of a cementer who cemented a well during daylight hours. It seems like the call for the cementing crew always comes at nighttime, but in the fracking world, we had it pretty good. You would have a call to the yard at some wee hour of the morning, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We would drive out to location. We'd be rigged up and ready to go down hole by 8. And of course, rigged up in that time was, maybe 4 pumps, the blender, hydration unit if we were doing for a gel job, and sand consisted of 1 end dump trailer, maybe 2 for a big job. We would pump 50,000 pounds of sand for a single frac stage. Maybe 100,000 was a pretty big job when I started. So it was rare. We weren't done going down hole by 9 or 10 o'clock. We would rig out. We'd be back by shortly after lunchtime. On a rare occasion, we would have to do 2 stages in a single well. There would be a wireline run. And so, we'd put our feet up and wait while the wireline crew got done, and we'd frac a second stage in a vertical well. But I don't ever remember getting home past dark. And of course, in those days, it was a little different time. When you were on the road, we'd go to the bar and have a few drinks and enjoy some social time together, and then catch a few Z's in the hotel and head out and do it again the next day. So it was very different than fracturing looks today. And so it's been fun to watch the change over the 20 plus years I've been in the industry now.
It's
Wow.
amazing because now we're doing 10 to 18 stages a day. Sometimes we have 18 to 23 pumps on location. Like there's no, leaving location. You're there for the whole 10 to 12 days straight fracking. So, that's really amazing to hear the transition.
I
It
think a
is.
lot of
I
people
don't know how I would have done
listening.
my job today compared to how we did it then. We satellited every frac job. As I moved back into the office and I sat in-house at a customer's office, we'd satellite every frac job we pumped. We watched them all personally and made all the calls from the office. So, my day at that time was satellite. That company had 2 or 3 frac crews running with us. So we'd satellite 2 or 3 frac jobs in the morning. I'd spend the afternoon programming the next day's jobs. And that was our life. But I don't know how that would work if I was watching frac jobs 24 hours a day. It is a different time.
Wow. Yeah, what I was saying was for sure people listening are like, we're so jealous of that. Like you were home before dark and you had time to go hang out with the crew. That's awesome. The industry has definitely changed, like Jamie said. So you were there for a few years, I guess. And then what was your next transition and what made you switch over to Pinnacle?
So yeah, I was there a little over 5 years, 5.5 years, I guess. And over that time had become familiar with frac modeling and specifically the model we ran was Frac Pro at the time. And so this fellow, Dr. Lane Vyers, would come to our office and teach us Frac Pro classes, continue to advance our skills in modeling hydraulic fractures and how they grew underground. They looked like nice ellipses then. Of course, we know that's maybe not quite as true as we thought, but that was the work we did. And so I'd come to know Dr. Vyers over that time. Pinnacle, who was the company that was authoring that software, was also pioneering this technology around the idea of mapping hydraulic fracture growth underground. So in order to better understand what a fracture truly looked like, they were working, first of all, with a technology called tilt meters and then ultimately with microseismic. And they had developed a presence in the U.S. and were looking to grow into Canada to help us understand fracturing up there. I'd attended a few of their SPE talks or GRI sponsored lectures, so I knew a little bit about them. And so when it came time for them to open an office in Canada, the then vice president of business development, a guy by the name of Kevin Fisher, he runs PropX today, went to Dr. Vyers and asked for the names of a few folks who had been in his classes that he thought might be a good fit for running Pinnacle up there. And I was fortunate enough to be on that list. So I met Kevin for an interview, and ultimately the end of that interview process was lucky enough to be the person they chose to consider going to Pinnacle. That was a bit of a tough decision for me, I would say. I was excited by the technology as a bit of a tech nerd. I thought it was incredibly cool what they were doing. Recognized there were going to be some huge challenges applying that technology in Canada, just given our well spacing was so far apart. So microseismic and offset tilt were going to be an interesting challenge. But most of all, the thing I was scared to death about was I was going to have to be a salesperson. So, I'm an introvert by nature. I am happiest sitting here in my office in front of my computer screens, not having to talk to a whole bunch of people. And my engineering career had allowed me mostly to do that. I'd done some in-house work, so of course I'd interacted with the customers, but I could go there and talk to them about frac design and things, but actually cold calling on somebody and trying to sell some leading edge technology, that was pretty scary to me. But I had a few good friends that I sat down with over lunch, and ultimately they all, to their credit, encouraged me to take the plunge, and so I did. I took the plunge and moved over to Pinnacle. That was June of 2003. We were 2 people big in Canada at the time. There was a field person, Steve Stalzer. He was working out of his garage, and I rented a single office downtown, and that was the start of Pinnacle. And oh my gosh, what a scary journey! I remember talking to Michael Stock about 6 months in. He was the CFO at Pinnacle, now the CFO here at Liberty. And I hadn't sold a job yet. And said to Michael, like, oh my gosh, I've made a huge mistake, Michael. I think I'm the wrong person for this. And Michael was like, don't worry, it's a long sales cycle. It's all going to be fine. And it turned out it was all fine. The floodgates opened not too much longer after that. And it was a ride on a rocket ship with a group of people that I truly enjoyed spending time with. It was a lot of fun.
That is such an amazing story. I want What I really think is interesting too is when you were telling us about your time at Pinnacle, we knew how much you loved the people and you loved it being like a small organization. But we know during maybe a few years into it, Halliburton ended up buying them out. And I remember specifically you mentioned that, you rushed to leave at that point, and then you kind of looking back, you were like, well, maybe I might have took that leap too fast to leave. But it was because you liked being with a smaller company. Can you talk about that and talk about what you learned in that process?
Sure. So Pinnacle was a special experience, and I would quite candidly say one I maybe didn't truly appreciate as much as I should have at the time. I say to many people, I was a young and somewhat naive person, and every now and then you don't really find out how great something was until it is taken away from you, and Pinnacle was precisely one of those situations. I think I told you the story when I share my story about Pinnacle. I show a picture of an empty roll of toilet paper with a caption, "You don't know what you got till it's gone," which I think is just a very apt description of what we had there. I truly enjoyed every moment of my time at Pinnacle. We were working on all the coolest projects. We were at the leading edge on hydraulic fracturing. If somebody was testing a new play or a new completion design in an existing play, we were there. And so I saw all of that stuff. And I worked with a group of people who were bringing what I thought was the coolest technology in the oil industry to commercial application, developing software to go along with that. Oh my gosh, what a ton of fun. And then along came this transaction, and Halliburton acquired the organization. This is the fall of 2008, I guess maybe October or thereabouts. And, Pinnacle in Canada was, I don't know, we were 25, maybe 30 people big at the time. We all fit in one small office together. A Christmas party was a social event where you knew everybody's name and everybody's partner that was there with them. And so we were a family. We had a lot of fun together. And the transition to Halliburton just brought some dramatic change with it. And it was a bit of an eye opener to me. It was, things came along that I just really hadn't appreciated as part of a bigger company. I had to fit people into boxes. Everybody had to have this grade attached to their job, and that grade defined how much money they could earn. And to get anything done, you had to fill in 10 pieces of paperwork. I was in the middle of trying to hire a new admin assistant. The wonderful gal that we'd had working at the front desk had developed an inclination to learn how to process microseismic data. And so we'd given her that opportunity. She thrived at it. And so we'd moved her out of her admin role into processing seismic. And I was looking to fill that role, which for me was a pretty straightforward process at Pinnacle. But in Halliburton, that's a different undertaking. There's forms to be filled out, approvals to be gotten, and HR to be involved. It was a bit frustrating to me. And so to your point, yeah, I left pretty quickly. I stayed just 6 short weeks after that transaction took place. And I would tell you, I felt bad about it because, of course, I left a lot of great people at Pinnacles in the Halliburton world. I just kind of jumped up and bailed on them, which is probably the last thing a good manager should do. But I did, selfishly enough. I probably made that move a little quickly. I got so frustrated so quickly. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as I can, and I did the next thing I could find. Looking back, I probably could have handled that a little bit differently, but these things are all learning experiences. Without ever having made a few mistakes in your life, you never get any better. So.
That's very true. And you never know, what could have happened, but luckily these changes and the moves that you made lead you to where you are today, which, is pretty good. And at the end of the day, I feel like you reunited with a lot of the Pinnacle people who are now all at Liberty. And it's cool that you guys have kept that, like when we're going to talk about culture a little bit later on, that small company feel where, you know most people's names and you interact a little bit better on a smaller scale. So you could tell that even you haven't really changed that side of how you feel about a company. So that's really cool. So I know you left to Zodiac Explorations. Was that when you left there?
I made a short stop at Trican, and I would say, you don't want to be proud of things you do very, very quickly, but I jumped over there. I stayed only 9 months at Trican, so it was not a long tenured role. Uh-huh. Which is not a practice I would certainly preach. It was just one of those circumstances where a unique opportunity came along. I was at Trican looking after the fracturing engineering team, and one of the salespeople came in and asked if I would come to a lunch with him. He had a customer who had been struggling with an unconventional completion in Eastern Canada and wanted to spend some time with somebody just trying to understand what had gone wrong there and maybe what, if anything, they could have done differently. And so I went to this lunch, and lo and behold, the person sitting across the table is a past mechanical engineering classmate. Her name was Louisa, and we weren't a huge mechanical engineering class, maybe 100 or thereabouts. So remembered Louisa as soon as we sat down. We had a great time reminiscing about school, but ultimately spent 3 hours talking about their unconventional completions world, and I think that led to further conversations, and ultimately the ask if I would consider coming and joining their little oil and gas company, Zodiac Exploration. And so I left Trican after 9 short months, but did so to embark on an experience that I'm ecstatic I had. I'd been a service company person in my entire career up to that point in time, had never actually been out to see a well drilled or to understand all of the decisions that went into that. And so wanted to have a go at the E&P side, wanted to see the whole thing from start to finish, including the fracturing piece that I knew so well. And so made that change and joined Zodiac. Back to a small company, again, maybe just trying to find that thing that I had lost at Pinnacle. Tremendous experience, though. I look back and still think fondly about all the things I got to try when I was at Zodiac.
Yeah, I remember when you mentioned when we first did our first call and you were telling us about this experience, I was like, this seemed like the experience of a lifetime to try all this stuff that you had no idea about. I mean, you were doing drilling and, like you were in frac and all of a sudden you were calling drilling stuff. But can you tell us a little bit about the one time where you mentioned like, hey, you guys shouldn't put your money in here. It was 2 wells, I believe, made in California. And they didn't trust you. They didn't take your call. You ended up leaving and they ended up losing all that money. So.
Yeah, it was a learning experience for me. Of course, every time you work for a new management team, you learn about a different management style and you find some things that you really, really like and you hope you'll emulate one day as a manager. And then you find some things that maybe you don't think were done well and you would aim not to do as a manager. Same thing as a kid, right? You always swear, I'm never going to be my parents. But of course, there are things your parents did that you probably take with you, and there are things you swear you're never going to do. And I would say so I say the same thing about my career, but this was a neat experience in that we had a huge acreage position in California. We were drilling in the central San Joaquin Valley, about an hour and a half north of Bakersfield, outside a little town called Kettleman City. We were drilling for a shale called the Crayenhagen, which most people talk about the Monterey there. The Crayenhagen is the shale below that, with the same idea that most people who were chasing unconventionals at the time were chasing, which was, we believe this was tight rock, source or very close to the source that we could complete with a horizontal well and a multi-stage hydraulic fracturing treatment and ultimately produce oil out of it. We were chasing the play because there had been some wells drilled there back in the 70s and maybe even into the 80s that had found oil. And so we were firm believers. We had the geology nailed down and that we were going to have some success with modern completion techniques that they just couldn't achieve back then. Our first well offset a well that was drilled, I want to say 1971 through 1972 or even into 73. I think the well took 390 days to drill. Just an astounding story compared to today when we drill these massive horizontal wells in as little as 5 days, as much as a couple of weeks, but still nothing compared to those days. So this well was drilled down to 13,000 feet or thereabouts. They took a huge kick. They lost control of the well. It flowed oil uncontrolled for 30 days or thereabouts. They killed it. They sidetracked 4 times. Never, ever had success getting oil back again. But we were offsetting this well by 800 feet, drilling for the same target formations. And it was pretty exciting. As you said, for a young engineer like me, there was myself and a drilling engineer, Rocky Snippa, and we were the engineering team. So drilling, completions, production, pipeline, the whole works. We were going to do it all. And so for a keen nerdy engineer like me, this was like the panacea of engineering projects. But with a lot at stake, these wells were deep, high pressure. The Crayenhagen's 0.9 psi a foot, so at 13,000 feet deep, they were big wells. So we drilled the first vertical well. There wasn't a service rig in California big enough to do a completion on it, so we were going to do the completion. We were going to test 4 intervals, and we were going to do it with a drilling rig. And there were only 2 drilling rigs, I think, in California big enough to drill these wells. So we didn't want to release the rig. This is 2009, headed into 2010. The world's digging itself out of a downturn again. And we saw activity starting to pick up, and we were fearful somebody'd contract that rig again. So the plan was to do the first part of the completion, reset for the second half, release the rig, and it was going to go over and start drilling our first horizontal, just a mile offset from the vertical. And then we would plan the horizontal trajectory based on our results from the vertical well, while it was still drilling the vertical piece of that well. So we drilled, and we got the well successfully drilled. We completed the bottom 2 intervals, the first one completely unsuccessfully. The second one flowed a little more water than we had hoped for. Reset, moved the rig over, spud this horizontal well, and I went to work on completing the upper 2 intervals. One interval which tested wet, and the other interval which tested 100% light sweet crude, 38 API, exactly what we were looking for. I was not a reservoir engineer, but I had invested some time to take a reservoir engineering course online from Texas A&M, and so put all of my knowledge to use and ran the volumetrics on this. And the quick and simple math was there was not enough oil in place to justify the cost of these wells. There was just no way. That vertical well cost us, of order $15 million. The horizontal was going to be a $25 million well. The payback just didn't go around. We could not physically get enough oil out of the ground to pay for a well like that. And so, I went to the leadership at the company and expressed my concerns about what was going to happen there. And at the end of the day, rightly or wrongly, a decision was made to continue drilling that well. And I felt like the writing was on the wall. I felt pretty strongly that we were not going to have a successful completion. But the leadership at the time, whether they chose not to hear me or felt that it would be a disservice to the investors to go backwards at that point in time, stopping would have meant plugging that well. We were in California. Getting a drilling permit would take 6 months or something. Would have meant plugging that well, resetting, releasing the rig for 6 months, getting a new permit, down dip in the reservoir, which is where I felt we needed to be, and then starting all over again. That would have stretched our budget a little bit, and obviously would have extended the timeline for getting some cash flow into the company. But I felt pretty strongly was the right decision. They chose the opposite one. That horizontal well ultimately got drilled and completed. It came on at 1,500 barrels a day, 1,400 of which was water. So of course, unfortunately, not an economic success. And so that was that. I made a decision before that horizontal well was completed. An opportunity came up to leave that company and join Sanjel, go back to my roots as a service company person. And so I did, but followed along and made sure the completion went fine and heard the results. And unfortunately, that of course meant Zodiac couldn't carry on. That was simply too much money spent on 2 big wells with no path to a future after that. So it ended up part of another E&P company, and I went on and went back to the service world, which I'm grateful for the engineering experience. It was incredible, and I'm grateful to Louisa specifically for giving me a chance to do that. Every engineer should that works in the oil industry should have the chance to understand that the whole aspect of the business from start to finish. And I'm a better engineer, and certainly a way better service company engineer for having worked on that side of the business now.
Wow.
What I think is really important about that story is the fact that not every single drilling operation is a success. And I know a lot of times all we hear is about the successful ones. And I think it's really important with somebody with your background to explain that you were even in a situation where it ended up not being a success. So I really appreciate you sharing that with our listeners. Going and moving on to culture and leadership style, sure. I wanted to ask you a question in regards to a time in your career where you had to make a really difficult decision. I remember you talking to us and saying that there's a time when your boss, as part of your actual bonus program, was going to have to make you let go of a colleague that you actually didn't really know personally. And it was a very difficult decision for you because that's not really in your values. Can you talk about how you dealt with that?
Yeah, it was. So in that particular world, of course, we had a bonus program with a series of goals, and those goals were, in most cases, goals like you would expect. They were in my role. I was more senior in the organization, so they involved financial performance, they involved HSE performance and things like that. But one year I got a little bit of a surprise, and my manager asked, put specifically in my goals, a request that I release somebody, a person who would be 2 levels below me. So, you know, I had a really hard time with that. Here's my manager asking me to earn a piece of my compensation, making a change 3 levels below him in the organization. And first of all, I just thought that was the wrong place for him to be focused at all. That as a manager, he was thinking about a person and that person's role in the company 3 levels below him, and was worried about whether or not that was the right person. Just said to me, focus was in the wrong spot. And maybe implied a little bit of a lack of trust in the people between him and that particular role. You know, I think as a manager, you hire great people to work for you, and you set them free to do great things, and you have to put trust and confidence in them to ultimately make decisions about the team that they're going to build. And if you can't demonstrate that sort of confidence in them, then perhaps you have the wrong person in those roles. And so that was a real frustration for me. And ultimately, I decided it wasn't something I was going to do. If that meant foregoing a piece of my bonus that year to not have to do that, then that was what I was going to do. I really struggled with that a lot. But to the point of taking away things that you see over time that you never ever want to repeat as a manager, that was one of those things. And I think it's something that ultimately permeates the world we live here at Liberty. You have to have trust in people. You have to provide them with freedom to go out and do a great job, and then you have to hold them accountable, of course, for the results that come with that. But if you find yourself in a situation where, as a manager, you have to insert yourself 3 levels down in your organization to make changes, then I think you have to step back and have a bigger look at exactly what's going on, because that's just not right. That says there is a bigger cultural issue inside of the company, or a bigger personnel problem, or whatever it might be. But that was a real eye opener for me. I respected that, this particular person for a lot of the things that they did in the company, but that was one that really came out of left field for me, that just never sat right with me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's really cool it's raw, right? And I think even a lot of people listening, they've probably been in that situation, because it happens. A lot of these companies, this is a thing. One thing that I want to talk on Liberty is, I have a few friends who've worked there for 2-3 years, and I remember always hearing like the culture, and that most employees, or 99% of them, are very happy to work there, and it's always positive. And usually, when you ask around people, how is this company, there's always a lot of negative and positive, or a little bit of half. With Liberty, it was always like, it's the best, it's awesome, we get these perks, we do this. Like, the culture obviously seems very positive. Can you tell us a little bit about how a company can establish that culture? And I think when we spoke, you mentioned that you have to start it from the beginning. It can't be after.
Yeah, well, this absolutely goes back to the foundation for Liberty, and why we're called Liberty. I mean, we are passionate people who believe in freedom of individuals, and so, I've been in the business now a little north of 20 years, as have many of my colleagues here. And as you mentioned earlier, of course, a lot of us are from Pinnacle. So we had a common bond that brought us together, and a common philosophy around how it was that we ran or thought about a business. And when you looked around in the pressure pumping space, and maybe this applies more broadly to the service industry as a whole, it was difficult to see organizations where people were number one. And so I look back through the service companies that I had passed through, and I don't know the statistic exactly for every one of them, but I think it would be very fair to say that on average, our turnover in the field on a yearly basis was maybe 45-50%. So every year you lost half the people in the field, and you had to replace those folks. And the reason I think for that was that they weren't the priority. People viewed service companies as valued on the number of trucks that they own, or the type of trucks that they had, or the technology that they had. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, if you put the best trucks and the best technology in the field, but you put a pile of uninvested people out there to run those trucks and assets, you are not going to be a successful company. And so when Liberty was founded, we looked at that problem completely in reverse. If we put the best people in the field and we create an environment where they want to come and stay for the long term, then as long as we support them with the right trucks and the right technology and things, we can't help but be a success. And so that was the whole premise behind Liberty, was this idea that we wanted to create a culture where people would come and make a career of a service life. And of course, as you well know, the service life is a tough one. You're out there in the field, and whatever the weather conditions might be, now you work incredibly long hours. You're generally away from home. Many of our folks rotate into the locations that they work in, so they're living in a camp at that point in time. They're away from family for extended periods of time. So it's a tough life. And for many people, it's not a career. It's not something that they can do for a long time, just because how hard it is. And so we set out right from the outset to make it a place where people would want to come, would love to be every day, would ultimately grow to call their colleagues their family, and also to make it a place that you could have a career and still have a family life. And so that started with something as simple as a 2-week on, 2-week off rotational schedule. And we rotate on a Wednesday. The goal was to have the crews from the field be able to be home with their families for 2 weeks out of every month, and to be able to spend at least 2 weekends at home. If they have kids at home and they want to be able to go to ball games and things like that, you have to find a way to do that. And of course, historically, that hadn't been the case. A lot of crews work 15 and 6, maybe 14 and 7. You'd spend a day traveling home, a day traveling back. You were home 5 days. If you were working nights, you spent some time sleeping to catch up. And the end result was not a lot of family time or time for yourself, whatever.
A lot of unhappy employees is what you get.
A lot of unhappy employees, yeah. And so the turnover remained huge. And so, we recognized an opportunity to do that a little differently. And so those have been the things that have framed all of the decisions we've made at Liberty since the company has started. The rotational schedule, the decision to shut down crews to have a holiday party each and every year. You'd be amazed how many of the field guys tell me they've never been to a holiday party in their career until they've come to Liberty. We always had.
I would always miss it. I was always working Christmas, like always.
So, how fair is that? So, all of these little things, they're small things when you look at them individually, but together they create a culture that I think people have come to love and appreciate and ultimately want to spend time at. And that the proof was in the pudding. My job here is just to make sure those guys have the tools, the assets, the training, whatever resources they need to be successful, and then to set them free to do that. I've learned over my career that painting people into boxes, that writing 20 rules that you have to live by in the field is not a pathway to success. Generally, it's a pathway to frustration and lack of motivation and lack of innovation and entrepreneurship. And that's not what we want at all if we're going to get better as an industry. So we're far from perfect. Oh my gosh, do we have tons of opportunity for improvement? But I think we have started down the road of headed towards an environment at a service company that can help people come and have a career and want to be here for the long haul, which is incredibly exciting to me. So yeah, I think there are always things we can find to do better, but gosh, I love to hear the stories from the people at Pinnacle around the things they value, that they appreciate. And I hope that they're smarter than me and they don't have to leave Liberty to find out that we've got the right things going here, unlike I did at Pinnacle.
I thank you for sharing. I love hearing about it. And more than anything, I hear it from the people who work there. And, they're not getting paid to say any of that, or like, it's just truth. And one thing that's really like crazy to me is that we all know that people should be number one. Like we are all employees in one company throughout our lives. And the main thing and number one reason why we probably leave at some point in our careers, it's you didn't feel like you were valued. You didn't feel like you were cared for. You felt like you were a number. That's, I would say 99% of why people would make a jump is because they don't feel like they care. They're cared. And even like you mentioned, like they are little things, but I can tell you right now, and for anybody listening, the little things are what matter the most. As someone who is in the field for 5 years, I would be so happy if I had like a manager come out to the field and bring us snacks from the gas station. It made my day. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best manager on the planet. He brought me food. Wow. You know, the whole crew would be so happy over like, you know, $20. And it's crazy how sometimes we think like, oh, they want more money. They want this, they want all these other things. And in reality, we just wanted like a little pat on the shoulder of like, you guys are doing a great job. I know you mentioned you go out and visit as much as you can to the field or for Christmas. That is huge. So like anyone listening, even if you don't even have a field, just when managers come and just even come by your office and say like, hey, how's it going? How's the family? Like all these things matter so much. And sometimes it's crazy to me that like it's so difficult, but it's the easiest thing, you know? But
Yeah, it's one of those things you just have to make time for. And I'm as guilty as anybody of getting busy doing this, that, or the other thing, and then just not planning that trip. And so, you know, it ultimately comes down to the holiday parties are fantastic for that. That they are an opportunity to get out and spend some social time with the guys. You know, even when you get out to location, of course, they're busy, and I try not to get in their road. I'm probably more of an interruption than anything when I get out there, but I appreciate that they let me wander around and pretend like I'm part of the team. So always fun to do that. But the holiday parties are wonderful for that. It's just a great chance to spend some time. And you know, we always have a dodgeball tournament, so we can take out a little energy throwing dodgeballs at one another, and you know, just get to be to be a better family. And so yeah, wonderful experience. And to your point, I think until you've been in the field, you don't appreciate how much those little things mean. So I'm a firm believer everybody's got to spend some time in the field. You just got to go out there and learn what it means to do what those people do each and every day. You come home with a different appreciation for that piece of our world.
Definitely. And I think it doesn't matter what level you are in the organization. I think, you know, showing somebody at your level going out there speaks volumes too. But, you know, everybody from every manager to even the salespeople, you know, spending time out in the field. I think you get a lot of respect from your field personnel and the guys that you're personally selling the job for, and having that connection with them, I think, is ultimately really helps you just in the organization alone, but also just the camaraderie, you know, outside of the office. So really appreciate you sharing that.
And a quick thing that I wanted to note, I saw on LinkedIn yesterday, there was a girl who posted about how excited she was to join Liberty, like, you know, fresh out of school, I think, or maybe had gone laid off and going on. And she made a little post about it. And then I went to look at the comments just as I was scrolling by, and you were like, hey, welcome to the family. You know, like that is nothing for most people. That took 3 seconds? That girl is probably like, oh my gosh, the president of Liberty just wrote on my picture. Made her day. She's excited to come join and come work for someone like you. Like, that's what I'm saying, is the small things really matter. I'm sure that made her day, you know, which it was nothing for, you know, it took nothing out of you, but it made a new employee who's super excited now to even join just because of that comment. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. I had to mention that.
Oh, appreciate that. It's a wonderful thing about a digital world. Of course, you know, in times past, you couldn't have done that. You know, it wouldn't have been so easy to say welcome to a field engineer who maybe didn't come through the office. But in today's world, it's so easy to be able to do those sorts of things. And yeah, I think it's nice that we have that sort of connectivity now with everybody, even though we're spread far apart.
Yeah. And so just to wrap up, we had one last question was, can you tell us a little bit, or what is the secret sauce to your guys' marketing on LinkedIn, and kind of like the videos that you guys put out, and who's behind that? And do you have any, you know, rules, or, you know, how do you control that?
Yeah, because the first time we talked to you about this, I was just stunned, and I loved your comments, and also just who you have running the program for the marketing. So we're just really excited for you to share this with our listeners.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, you know, the marketing team here at Liberty and is 4 wonderful women. Audrey heads that team up, and so she does external relations and leads the marketing communications team here. But between her and Liz and Skylar and Deanna, oh my gosh, what a fun group. They have a ton of fun, and I think it's apparent in our marketing. They love what they do. They are strong believers in the Liberty story, and it comes through in everything that we share on social media. And then we've got nerdy Lane Vyers sitting down the hallway there, who is just a ton of fun as an engineer and loves to find ways to share stories. And so we've got onto this Tech Tuesday idea where we try to talk about something pertaining to the oil and gas business, and specifically hydraulic fracturing, so that everybody has an opportunity in just a couple of minutes to learn a little bit about what we're doing out there in the field. I think we've been guilty as an industry of putting our heads in the sand. I don't think we've done a tremendous job helping the general public understand what we do every day. And so these are all little things that yes, while important for marketing for Liberty, are also an attempt to just be a little bit more human about who it is that we are and what it is that we do every day. We work in what I would argue is the most important industry in the world. It supports everything else that happens around us. And yet we find ourselves, I think, generally just misunderstood by the public. And the end result of that misunderstanding is that in some cases they just don't want us around. And that's frustrating to me, because I think if they truly understood all of the great work that happens here, how much the people in this industry care about what we do, and how hard we work to do it safely every day to the highest standard we can. And if they understood what it truly meant for them and their future and the world that we live in today compared to just a couple of 100 years ago, they would think very differently about what we do. So, this is our little contribution to that. We aim to be public about everything that we do, from the technical side to our technology to the HSE side of things, all of that stuff. Anything we can talk about to help educate the public in any way we can, we are all in for it. So we're blessed to have that team of four that help make that happen.
That's awesome. And I think also too is just the liberty of them being able to post a lot of like what's in their head, right? Not, you mentioned that you gave them just a lot of freedom to like, yeah, you guys can, you guys have the brains to do it, right? That's why you hire those people. So
that's right. You hire them, you trust them, and you set them free to do great things. We all make mistakes. It happens, but and that's okay. That's how we all get to be better at what we do. But yeah, the key to success here is definitely letting people have the freedom to go out and do what they're passionate about, and we all win because of that.
And thank you for sharing the comments about the industry itself, because we find that very frustrating as well, which is, another reason why we started this podcast was to show everybody what we're doing and what we're doing in this industry to help, not only help everyday lives become easier, but, just ultimately for the environment as well. We do so much for the environment. I just wish that, the outside world knew what we did. So I do appreciate, Liberty taking the initiative to go and talk about that, and make it part of your initiative as well. So thank you for that.
Well, and I would say the same thing backwards. We are blessed to have people like you in the industry that are, ambitious about getting out there and sharing people's stories, making these podcasts happen. This is not my thing. I'm not going to be the person who's going to start a podcast and start sharing stories. So I truly appreciate that the two of you have done this, and I hope that because of the stories that you're able to share out there, more people find their way into this industry and come to understand it as the gift that it is, I think, to modern humanity.
Well, thank you so much. And we really appreciate having you on. You had such an excellent story. And we thank you again for, saying yes to us. I know it was a random LinkedIn message, but we really are thankful for people like you who just are like, yeah, let's share my story, and are open to talk to us.
Well, so much fun. I'm glad I was able to do it with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Ron. We appreciate it.
Take care.